Erev Torah B'Tayb. Two things I want to tell you, some interesting things in halakha. Number one is, a person, let's say he's eating something. Some fruit, some mezonot, whatever it is, right? And what happens is, right, that they bring him some other fruits now. He was eating, let's say, apple, right? Now they brought him a mandarina. They brought him orange, like something else, So he already made ha'etz one time, right? So the question is now, when they bring him a new fruit, let's say his wife brought him, or his children brought him, does he have to make another ha'etz now? This is the question, right? When they bring him another fruit. Or the one that he already made covers it. What's halakha? So the rule is, that whatever they bring you, from the kitchen, let's say, from your house, you already have that in your house, this fruit. So you were expecting, that they may bring you something like this, So if they bring you more things from your house, from your kitchen, from your fridge, right? So you don't need another bracha for this. You already made ha'etz one time. How many times you're going to make ha'etz, right? So they bring you more things, whatever it is, right? Let's say they bring you cherries, grapes, whatever, right? They're all ha'etz. So one ha'etz covers everything, Even they're going to bring you later on some more things. This is usually the way it is. Doesn't matter whether it's ha'etz or it's shakol or it's hadama. Same thing applies to all these things, right? Same thing also with mezonot, right? Let's say they brought you first some, kugel, right? And then they brought you some cake, some, borekas, whatever, right? It's all the same. It's mezonot. Everything is mezonot. How many times are you going to make mezonot? I mean, you're sitting in the same room, right? You didn't go anywhere. You're staying there. So one mezonot covers everything, right? Same thing, right? Same thing as we said. Okay, fine. That we know, right? But here's the thing, right? Something interesting brought down in the Bet Yosef in the name of the Rashba, Man Rabbi Rashom. He also brings it down. Chazon Ovadia. He brings down this halakha. What is halakha? Which is like this. Let's say they brought you, right? You were making, you were eating one fruit, right? Apple, right? But now they brought you, your favorite fruit, right? The one you like the most. Let's say, you like cherries, right? I like cherries. I don't know, for some reason. I like cherries the most. So, if they bring you, says the Rashba like this, if they bring you now something, your favorite one, the one you like the most, you should make another bracha on this one. Or something which is very prominent, more chashuv, something more important, something more, it's considered to be more, right, nutritious, whatever, right, more chashuv, more important food. So in a case like this, says the Rashba, but Yosef brings it down, that you should make another bracha. Why? Because this one, is more important for you, or it's more delicious for you. This is your favorite one, the one you like the most. So he says, in a case like that, you should make another bracha because of the chashivut, right? The importance of this one for you. This one for you is more important.
Also chayetz?
Yeah, same bracha, right? That's the thing. Same bracha, but you gotta do it again because this is the one you like. For instance, I'll give you another example. Right? For me, right? Sometimes I drink water, right? So I make shakol, okay? So then, right, I have a candy bar, I like candy bars. This one I like, It's my favorite one. So if I'm going to eat the candy bar, right, I'm going to make another shakol. Why? Because I like this one a lot more than the water. You know what I mean? So that's the thing, this is my favorite. So again, right, same thing. But there is an exception to this, right? The exception is like this. Let's say, right, let's say, as we said, right, you're drinking water. So you were thinking, this bracha I'm also going to make for the candy bar. I'm going to have the candy bar later. You were thinking, you had your mind on it. So if you had your mind on it to eat this one also, then you don't need another bracha. Because you already covered it, right? Since your mind was on that one also. Same thing with the fruits, right? If you were eating, apples, right? Now they brought you cherries. You were thinking also to eat cherries, right? Or grapes, whatever it is, right? So then you don't need another bracha. You already, in your mind, you were poter this one. You exempted it already, So therefore, you don't. In a case like that, you don't need another bracha. So this is the rule, It's an important rule to know. Okay, fine. That's one thing. I'll tell you also another thing, which is brought down in Zohar Kadosh. I saw that it says, right, that I spoke about this one time with Boris. We had a discussion about this. I'll tell you what it is. Right? Sometimes a person, not sometimes. We the Sfarim, right? We do it every day, right? Chatati aviti pasharti, right? We do in the morning. We do, right, also after Mincha, right? Now we're not doing because of Mamad Har Sinai, right? After Shavuot. Until when, by the way? We do. Until when? Yud Bet, right?
Thursday.
So what does that mean? Yud Bet we're not going to do, and Yud Gimel we're going to do already, right? That's what it means, right?
Right.
Good. So that's the rule, So, but anyway, in general, right, we do vidui every day. The Sfaradim, Baruch Hashem. This is a very important thing. So, as we said, right, it says the Zohar Kadosh that when you do vidui, and you're saying your sins that you did, right? I did this sin, I did that sin, It says the Zohar Kadosh, don't say out loud what you did, because you're embarrassing yourself, if people are watching you, and listening, what is this guy's a sinner, you're saying, oh yeah, I went with a married woman, I had relations with a married woman, everybody's going to hear you, what are you telling people, you went with a married woman, it's not really something, you should be saying. So, there's a rule like this, right, which says that you're not allowed to speak Lashon Hara about yourself, also, you're not allowed, so what does that mean? Don't tell people, that you did sins, you know what I mean? What are you telling people? I did this sin, People should not be hearing, that you did sins, you know what I mean? What's it their business? Lashon Hara. Same thing, So there's a story like this, brought down about the Chafetz Chaim. They say one time, he was going on a train, in those days they already had a train, 100 years ago. They made the train already, So he was going, from one place to another, one town. He was going to some kind of convention, Vad, of Rabbanim, all kinds of things, right? Some kind of convention. So what happened was, he's sitting there in the train, right? Somebody sits next to him, So this guy doesn't know. He's also going to the convention, a religious Jewish guy. But he doesn't know this Chafetz Chaim. He doesn't know he is, right? Doesn't know him. So he sits down, listen to this, right? He sits down, right? And next to the Chafetz Chaim. He says, so Chafetz Chaim tells me, he says, you going also to the convention of the rabbis? You going to the Vad? Tells him, yeah, of course, I'm going over there, right? So he tells the Chafetz Chaim, he says, he says, I heard the Chafetz Chaim is going to come there, he's going to be there, He didn't know that it was him, He says, I heard he's coming there. So he says, that, who he is, right? Big tzaddik, Chafetz Chaim. He told him like this, right? So Chafetz Chaim told him like this. He was Anav, a very humble person, So he told him, he says, he's not such a big tzaddik, Chafetz Chaim. He told him, he says, he's not such a big tzaddik. He's a nice guy, So this guy, didn't like what he said, what I mean? So he told him, he says, no. He says, he's a big tzaddik. What are you talking about? You don't know who you're talking about. Right? So Chafetz Chaim said, no. I said, he's not, he kept arguing like this. So what did he do? He smacked him, this guy. He told him, stop! Gave him a big smack. Says, who are you to talk about the Chafetz Chaim like this? Chatzuf. So Chafetz Chaim, he got smacked. Can you imagine like this, So, so what he said, right? He learned from this halacha, So he says, you're not allowed to speak Lashon Hara about yourself either. That's why I got smacked, I'm talking Lashon Hara about myself, It's ridiculous, So we see from there, Be'emet, So when a person does vidui and tells everybody his sins, he's speaking Lashon Hara about himself. You cannot do this, this is not a proper thing to do. People are listening to you, that they say, oh, this guy, look what he did this, he did that, But here's the thing, right? I have to tell you one thing though. We're not talking here about what it says in the Sidur, Aviti chatati pashati, right? Pagadnu, gazalnu, because everybody says this, so they're not suspecting you on that. That you said these things. Because everybody says them, So I'm not talking about that. We're talking about a person, who he sinned, like a special, something different, that he wants to say that he did that sin. Specify, I did, as we said, right, did something, specific. So he wants to make a bidui on that specific sin. So there, right, we say that, since nobody says this but you're the only one who's saying it, right? So don't say out loud, like this in front of people. So truth is, that there is a halacha like this, by the way, brought down, when it comes to Yom Kippur, that a person, right, when he says vidui, he's supposed to say, right, the sins that he did, also specify them, So therefore, since there's people around you, right, on Yom Kippur, they're going to listen to you, right, if you say these things. So you're not allowed to say in front of them, as we said, right? So what should you do? Say quietly, Don't show to them, that you did this sin, Otherwise you're speaking Lashon Hara about yourself. That's no good. You're embarrassing yourself like this. I'll finish with this. I'll tell you something funny. One time, I remember, I was in in Israel. I was in a certain kollel learning there, whatever. So one guy, comes up to me, one of the rabbis there. He says, tell me, he asked me, says, tell me, he says, you ever did this sin? Says, you ever did this before? He asked me about a certain sin, So like I'm I'm like in shock, he's asking me if I did a sin, So the truth is, this was before I learned this halakha, I didn't really know this halakha so good. But anyway, I had a feeling, it's not proper to do this, you know what I mean? So the truth is that if a person comes and asks you, right, did you do this sin before? Let's say, I'll give you an example, right? Let's say he asks you, a lot of people do this, today, now it's legal, already, they smoke marijuana, right? There's drugs, there's a drug. So a lot of people now smoke, by the way, I went, to a certain shul. I'm not going to mention the name, right? And, I published, I posted on the internet, right? The Rabbi Feinstein says that you're not allowed to smoke marijuana. It's asur, according to halakha. He has a smoke marijuana. Hashish, right? He's talking about hashish over. It's the same thing. Hashish, marijuana, same thing. You know what it is, right? The marijuana is the leaf, right? And hashish is like a resin, but it's the same product. Same thing. Anyway, right? So he says over there, you're not allowed to smoke, hashish, right? Marijuana. So I posted this, on the internet, and one guy, from one of the shuls over here, he tells me, he says, Rabbi, Ramoshe Feinstein, he says, I don't believe what he said over there, he says, I don't believe. I said, what do you mean you don't believe? He says, I smoke, he tells me, I smoke, So religious guy, can you imagine? Religious guy, he smokes marijuana, yeah, a lot of people, okay, yeah, I get you, But anyway, you're not allowed to, according to halakha, you're not allowed to do drugs.
They're giving it as a medicine, no?
Right, that's something else, right? He's saying a good point, right? If they're giving it from medicine, it's allowed. So what's the reason, by the way, they prescribe, marijuana for sick people? Because of the pain, It's a pain reliever. That's what it is, They have pain, a very strong pain. So the doctor gives them, to relieve the pain. That's what it's about, So for this purpose, it's allowed, Because there are some people who have very acute pain, very strong pain. They cannot take it, If they don't take it, if they don't give it, take some. By the way, they don't smoke the marijuana. They swallow it. That's like a pill. Same thing, But they don't tell them to smoke marijuana. They tell them to give them a pill with a chemical there, Same thing. But anyway, right? The point is that, as we said, right? That this guy tells me, he says, I smoke marijuana. I'm like, you smoke? You kidding me? You're a religious Jew, How are you smoking marijuana? Not for medicinal purpose. He's doing it for fun, I'm saying, cannot do that. So anyway, the point is, Rabbi, that if somebody asks you, right, listen to this, right? Somebody asks you a question. Did you ever, smoke, marijuana? You did hashish. You did some drugs. Even if you did it, when you were young, you used to do it. So a lot of people did, when they were young, they tried drugs, they tried cigarettes, smoking, all kinds of things they tried. It's normal, today everybody tries it, whatever. Not everybody, but a lot of people. Most people, they try it, whatever. So, it is, right? Don't tell them, actually, I used to smoke, I did this, and you're allowed to lie, about this, even say a lie. Even though it's not true what you're saying, you're allowed to lie. Why is that, by the way? What's the reason why?
So I'm not going to get embarrassed.
Exactly. So the truth is, that anything which is going to embarrass you, in front of people, you're allowed to lie about it and say, I never did that, Even though, like it says in the Torah, stay away from lies, the Torah says, right? It's written in the Torah. But when it comes to things like this, what you're going to embarrass you, you're allowed to, lie. Why should you, make yourself into a monkey, in front of people? Exactly, right? That's the whole thing, So again, right? The point is that, you shouldn't speak Lashon Hara about yourself, even if it's true. And they ask you, did you do it? Tell them, no, I didn't do it. That's it, Tell them, cold face. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, amen, amen. לפיכך כשאומר, זה הקדוש ברוך הוא לא זכר לישראל, לפיכך חיבר להם תורה ומצווה שנאמר אדוני חפץ למען צדקו יגדיל תורה וידיר.